All right, so let's take a look at somebody's attempt at coming up with an integrated theory of criminology. And the first one that we're going to look at is written by a criminologist by the name of Delbert Elliott. And he wrote an integrated theory in 1985. So Elliott was one of the people who was really one of the most vocal critics of traditional theories by saying that he really found it inappropriate to focus on just one underlying cause of criminal behavior, and instead suggested that a good theory to come up with, so his integrated theory, was actually integrating three of the major theories that you've already learned about, taking bits of them and putting them together into kind of a new integrated theory. So the three theories that he looked at were strain, general strain theory, essentially, social control theory, the theory from Hershey, and eventually social learning theory. But according to him, this integration happens in three basic steps. So the first step of the integration process, according to him, the first step in becoming a criminal, in criminal behavior for him, has to do with elements that he took from strain theory and social control theory. So for him, delinquency, getting into delinquent and criminal behavior, is the highest when a person experiences both more strain and less social control. So if you think about those two different theories, general strain theory, social control theory, think about what general strain theory says about why people commit crime. According to that theory, people commit crime because they experience a number of different strainful situations that causes them to become angry and frustrated, which causes them to become to become criminals. So that's one explanation for criminal behavior. Then you've got social control theory. Social control theory argues that if left to our own devices, we would be committing crime. It's only when we experience a weakness, a weakened control from society, that we are free to commit crime. So basically what Elliott's saying is there's probably some truth to both of those things. We shouldn't just commit to one of those explanations. So for him, what probably happens in leading a person to start to become delinquent is when not only do they experience stresses and strains in their lives, but they also experience a breakdown in social control. So not only do things cause them to experience anger and frustration, but they also gradually become less and less committed to conventional society. They have less of a stake in conformity, they experience less social control. So according to him, that is the first kind of step towards a person becoming kind of an offender, delinquent. And the second step of his theory is where he adds in that third traditional theoretical idea. So in step 2 of his theory, he adds in the ideas from social learning theory. He borrows a couple of the ideas, essentially, from social learning theory. And what he says in this second step is, given the fact that step 1 happens, given the fact that somebody is experiencing a lot of strain and gradually experiencing and being influenced less and less by social control elements, for him, if people like that then get exposed to delinquent peers, both to their attitudes and to their behaviors, that is going to be the real key affecting delinquency. So according to him, the most important part of this theory is the social learning element of it. That yes, you are going to commit some crime when you are under strain and you are experiencing a breakdown in control. He doesn't dispute that, but for him, what really pushes you towards becoming a delinquent, an offender, is when you move into delinquent peer groups and when delinquent peers share their attitudes and beliefs to you. For him, that was really the most important part of moving you into kind of a delinquent, a criminal lifestyle. So you can see how this is an integrated theory. He's essentially borrowing the three key ideas from each of these theories, kind of ignoring the background elements of those theories, ignoring some of the conflicting assumptions about human nature that are out there between these theories, and taking kind of the key elements of them and saying all of these three things, they can work together and influence a person. It's not just one of these things that's going to matter. So take a look at this model of Elliott's integrated theory, and this will hopefully make you help you to understand how it is that he combined social control, strain theory, and social learning theory. So you see at the beginning of this process that he argues takes place, those first kind of 4 boxes on the left-hand side of your screen, those are all elements of general strain theory and kind of social control theories in general. So experiencing strains in your life, being inadequately socialized, coming from an area of social disorganization. All of those things are going to matter, not only because they lead to you never really establishing a strong pro-social bond, never really being influenced by social control, but they also matter because they are going to push you into becoming strongly bonded to delinquent groups. So it's an integrated theory because he doesn't just argue that there's just one kind of linear relationship. As you can see, he also thinks that experiencing strain and frustration can in and of itself just push you into delinquent peer groups. And he would also argue that people who have a weak social bond don't necessarily have to become bonded to delinquent peer groups to commit crime. That's just one potential channel, one potential route. So often in these integrated theories, you're going to see models that look like this. You're going to see arrows coming from things in a bunch of different parts of the theory, suggesting that it's not just one route or not just one relationship that matters here. But what I really want you to get out of this model is, despite the fact that he's combining 3 theories here, there is a hierarchy. He definitely is making the case that the most important factor in this model is the strong delinquent bonding. For him, the social learning element of his model is the most important. That's what's really going to drive you to persistent, long-term, frequent criminal delinquent behavior. Those other things do matter. The strain and the social control elements matter, but they mostly matter because they work through strong delinquent bonding. So this is an example of an integrated theory. It's someone's attempt to take the best bits of some of your more traditional theories of crime and put them together into a more general explanation. Now, not everyone agrees that this is a good idea to do. Because if you think back to some of the traditional theories we've talked about in this class, think about the human nature assumptions that are at work in some of these theories. According to a strain theorist, we have to get strained and frustrated in order to push us into committing crime. That's a very different idea from the ideas that are in social control theories, which are also part of this theory. Social control theorists say that no, if left to our own devices, we would naturally commit crime. We would naturally be delinquent and deviant to get what we want. We have to be controlled and kept from doing those things. So some people don't like the fact that you're putting very conflicting ideas into one theory of crime. Think about the human nature assumptions of social learning theory, which is where that strong delinquent bonding part of his theory comes into play. According to social learning theory, we're kind of born pliant, social, blank slates. We have to learn how to do everything, including commit crime. Well, some people have a really hard time reconciling the fact that that idea can get put into the same theoretical idea as social control elements like having weak social bonds. But according to Eliot's not as concerned about those underlying assumptions as he is coming up with a more broad, more improving the explanatory power of his. So another theory that we would put into an integrated framework, it was written in the early 90s by a researcher now at the University of Maryland called Terence Thornberry. And Thornberry wrote a theory that he called an interactional theory. So we put this into this integrated section because, similar to Delbert Eliot, Thornberry also incorporates the elements of a bunch of different traditional theories into this new interactional theory. This is also a theory that has a developmental element to it. Most people study it in the context of a developmental theory because he argues that this theory and this model changes slightly as you age. It changes depending on what age group you're in. So Thornberry's idea and his argument is that social structural elements of a person's life matter. Your social position, your class, things like that, your demographic characteristics matter because it impacts things like social control and social learning elements of our lives. So depending on what social position you're in, that's going to play a really big role, according to him, on how much you are able to establish social control in your life, how much social elements are going to control you and impact you. And social structural elements of your life, things like your class, your race, your demographic characteristics, those are also going to matter because they really impact the different kinds of forces that you're going to learn from in your life. So he takes these three elements, kind of social structural characteristics and these two theories, social control and social learning, and creates what he calls an interactional theory. The idea behind his theory is that once someone's bonds to society are weakened or broken, they can then learn delinquent attitudes and behaviors from people around them. So for him, it's a process where he's really saying that social control theory and social learning theory can kind of be combined. And once you have broken free of social control elements, once you don't care anymore about, family, school, kind of pro-social things that would give you control, that's when you're free, basically, to learn from deviant and delinquent others. That's kind of the basic idea of his theory. And it's a developmental theory because he wants you to understand how the processes here related to these theories impact us at different stages of the life course. According to him, the way that you interact with people in terms of control and learning elements are going to be very different when you're a child, when you're an adolescent, a young adult. And we need to understand how that process happens. And then the final element of his theory, which is what makes it an interactional theory, here's where you really get the name of his theory from, is he doesn't argue that this is a one-way relationship. In other words, if you experience a breakdown in social control and you begin to develop delinquent attitudes and beliefs and that causes you to commit crime, your committing criminal behavior is going to impact those things itself. It's going to have its own reciprocal impact on your social control and social learning elements. So if you start committing crime, that's going to keep increasing the breakdown of social control. It's going to increase the amount of delinquent attitudes and beliefs that you embrace that enter into your life. So basically, and I'm going to show you a model of his theory on the next slide, but what you should notice from the model of his theory is that all of these different things interact and affect each other. It's not a one-way relationship. If you start committing crime, that is going to feed back and continue to impact you. It doesn't end just at your first entrance into criminal behavior. So let's take a look at his theory. And again, I don't want you to rush and copy this thing down. I want you to focus a lot more on the main ideas that you see in this graph here. So when I look at this theory, I notice a couple things. I notice a couple things as it's modeled out. First of all, there doesn't seem to be one beginning or end to this theory, right? In terms of the models that you've seen so far in this class, they all tend to kind of lead to delinquency. But this is an interactional theory, which means that he's arguing that not only do a lot of these background factors cause delinquent behavior, but delinquent behavior is going to then impact those background factors. So just take a look, go through this model a little bit to yourself. For example, take a look at the far left of the model where it says attachment to parents. If you follow going out to the left there, one of the things Thornberry suggests is that having a low attachment to parents, so that's the solid arrow going to the left with a negative sign next to it, having a low attachment to parents is going to be associated with a positive, essentially, association with delinquent peers. So that's why there's a negative relationship there. And subsequently, as you can see, there's an arrow going back to attachment to parents. So having an association with delinquent peers is then going to reduce your attachment to your parents. So there's all these kind of interactional relationships going on in this theory. And according to him, this basic structure is, you can put this at different stages of the life course and explain criminal behavior in kind of the same way. So this is his This is his graph in childhood. So you have things like attachment to parents and commitment to school in here. If you look at his interactional theory at the adult level, it'll say things like attachment to spouse, commitment to job. His point was this basic process is the same. It's just that as you age, different aspects of social control, social learning are going to impact you. And as you can see, the delinquent behavior and delinquent values are part of the graph, but they're not the be-all, end-all. And having delinquent behavior in turn influences other things. So if you go down to the bottom right of the chart, according to him, for whatever reason you start engaging in delinquent behavior, that is then going to impact things. So your delinquent behavior is going to further decrease your commitment to school. It's going to further increase your association with delinquent peers, and it's going to further increase your delinquent values. So really the point I want to get you to see out of this graph, some people look at this thing and they just become overwhelmed, but I just want you to take into account the fact that he's arguing that all of these things impact each other. It's a reciprocal interactional idea, and it's borrowing from several different theories. Things like conventional values and attachment and commitment, those are all social control elements. Associating with delinquent peers and having delinquent values, that's a social learning element. So he's really combining those two theories into one interactional idea.